We're going to spend the majority of our class time today talking about the course project. And before we get into that, the homework assignment's due on Monday. I'm going to give you a couple of key ideas from one of those problems, but it's related to annual worth analysis, which we've already discussed before, just some reinforcing of those topics. So here is the problem that I wanted to give you some sort of key ideas about. This is problem 611. In the problem statement, it's talking about someone who's inherited money from their aunt. And part of the reason why I want to tell you about this problem is just so that you have an easy time preparing a cash flow diagram. Because the problem statement doesn't give you one. It's not already laid out. You kind of have to translate the words into a cash flow diagram. And by the way, that's one of the suggestions that I got in the feedback I collected from you, is that sometimes it would be useful to have like more practice interpreting these written problems. Okay, so Sylvia received $500,000 inheritance. And from reading that, you may be tempted to say, all right, my cash flow diagram begins with an inflow. But actually, that's not the case. It's just sort of background information on where the money came from. Now, not every scrap of details in these problems is going to translate into something you need to include in your calculations. So for instance, the fact that her name is Sylvia, the fact that it's going to be in Hawaii, and for that matter, the fact that the investment is a house. All of that's just sort of extraneous background details, but fine, we'll take it for what it is. The bottom line is this person has $500,000 and they're going to spend it to buy a condo, an investment. And so your first activity is an outflow of $500,000 at the present, at year 0. Now, what it also says is that she plans to own it for 20 years and then sell it. So you can think of that as like a salvage value at the end of the 20 years. It's a one-time future amount. And the estimation is that it will be 90% of the purchase price. And so that tells you the amount of the inflow, because that selling the house is going to be income that comes back to Sylvia. All right. So the first thing it asks about is the capital recovery amount. Remember, the definition of capital recovery is how much you have to receive each year in order to have balance between the amount that was originally invested, the salvage value at the end of the useful life, and some rate of return. The rate of return is 8%. She hopes to make 8% per year on the purchase. And so what you'll be doing is you'll be finding an annual amount that has to be received each year. Now, we're assuming there's no annual maintenance and operations. It's just this is the amount she's going to have to charge as rent from her renters in order to make the 8% return. So any questions so far? It's pretty straightforward so far. So what we could say, if we wanted to draw a cash flow diagram to summarize this problem, then we'd say here is this initial outflow of $500,000 at year 0. Year 0. The interest rate that we're solving for is 8%. And this is P. It's a present worth of $500,000. There's going to be many years, 1, 2, 3, 4, of inflow that she's going to have to receive. And then at year 20, there's also going to be that same inflow. So the amount is unknown, but there is a one-time known amount, a future of 90% of $500,000. Okay, so we need to, in step A, solve for what is that amount, the capital recovery. Step B is a little bit trickier, part B of this problem. It changes the underlying circumstances. It says, what if there's a real estate boom? And so two things changes because of this real estate boom. The first thing is that she's only going to hold on to it for 10 years instead of 20. And so that's going to change our cash flow diagram for part B. I'd recommend that you draw 2 cash flow diagrams for this problem. Here's the Part A cash flow diagram. The Part B cash flow diagram is only going to go through 10 years. So 1, 2, 3, and so on through 10. So she still pays $500,000 to buy it. And now here's the important thing. What purchase price is necessary to realize the same amount as the 8% return expected over the 20-year ownership period? So what that means is, assume that the A is the same amount that you got from Part A. So the annual series, you know, the rent that this person is receiving, what you need to do is you need to assume that you still have that amount that you solved for in Part A. What we're trying to find now, though, is what should be the F. So the F is unknown. And so you want to find what F is going to give you still an 8% return over this period if you're only receiving the same amount in rent that you had in Part A. So the difference between the two is in Part A, you had 20 years. You had 20 years to make your return. In Part B, you've only got 10 years of rent, and so the sales price at the end, this future value, is going to have to be a lot higher. And so I guess that's possible in a boom in rental, in real estate. Okay, so in Part B, you use that same capital recovery amount, which is the annual rent. She still buys the condo for $500,000. She receives the income. So there's an inflow amount each year for 10 years, including the year that it's sold. But then, for what amount is the condo sold for in year 10? You know, speaking of the feedback that I received, I went through and I marked when there were certain suggestions that were offered by more than one student, I marked those down. And so some of the things, just to let you know that I was listening, some of the suggestions that I got was to have a little bit of a review at the beginning of each class to summarize what we'd done in the previous class, sort of to help with the continuity there. Another common suggestion that was from more than one student is to try and incorporate a lot of real-world examples so that it's less about equations and factor methods and more about like how is this going to be utilized when you graduate. And I have a specific example in mind that I'm going to try and come back to satisfy that good suggestion. I already told you about the one where a few students said it would be helpful to have practice interpreting these word statement problems. A couple of students said, man, this class is easy. I feel like I'm not being challenged. Now, if you feel like the course is hard, maybe you think they're crazy. But there were a few people who said, like, it's fine, but I feel like I'm not really being challenged. And so I thought about, how do you deal with, when you've got 46 students in a room, how do you deal with trying to make the course accessible to the students who are struggling with it, and at the same time the students who are mastering it and finishing the in-class exercises halfway through the class period. And so one idea that I came up with that I'm actually going to show you about today is having two different project options. One of the projects is harder than the other, and you have no incentive to do the harder project other than, if you want to learn more. So I'll tell you more about those details. And so the handful of students who said this course is a little too easy, maybe I can satisfy your craving to be pushed with the secondary project option. And it's not like that much harder. It's just, it includes optimization and the other one doesn't. A couple of people said it would be useful to work out examples on the board before I give you the in-class exercise. So when time allows, I will do that. And then the other thing I highlighted, as more than one people were talking about, was what I just did. Have some time in class to go over homework problems that students might have trouble with. And so, this problem is one that I think that if you hadn't had a little bit of help interpreting the problem statement, you might have stumbled on the interpretation of Part B. So thank you for your feedback. I'm going to try and incorporate those ideas as much as possible into the course. Oh, speaking of the exam, you may be wondering about that. I've got the exam about 70% graded. A handful of students who didn't miss any points, I've already graded their exams because it's easy to grade it when the answer's right. But going in and finding the mistakes and trying to understand what happened, that takes a little bit longer. So I will have the grades posted online by tomorrow afternoon, and I'll return the exams to you in class on Friday. All right, so we're going to talk about the project. The project's important for a number of reasons. One is it's 9% of your course grade. So that alone means that you should take the project pretty seriously. Just as some background information, it's due on Friday the 18th of November, which is the last class period before we have Thanksgiving break. So you'll have this project done and off your shoulders in time to enjoy Thanksgiving turkey, to enjoy opening day of deer season the following Monday. Whatever's on your mind, it won't be the project because you're going to be finished in about a month and a half. Like I said, there are going to be two options, and I think that the majority of the class will probably go for option A. It's a little bit easier than option B. Option A and option A. I don't know what happened with that. It should be option A and option B. That's Excel for you. Or no, PowerPoint. Excel would never do that to me. B. Well, I'm in read-only mode, I guess. This is really important to get right. So here we go. As soon as it saves the file, it'll let me change it. B. All right. Whew. Crisis averted. Okay, the first one is having to do with personal finance and getting you to look at, right now while you're young, the importance of saving. The importance of saving is something that was impressed on me before I graduated from college, and the very first paycheck I got, I sent money off into an account called a Roth IRA. Anybody here heard of a Roth IRA before? It's a way of putting money into an account and it isn't taxed. The growth isn't taxed and the withdrawals aren't taxed. It's a way to get your money to grow tax-free. And there's a limit to how much the government lets you put into that account every year. But it's a way of basically avoiding taxes on a certain portion of your income and planning for the future. So I started doing that with my very first paycheck out of college because someone showed me the importance of compound interest, like on a spreadsheet, that saving $2,000 now when you're young is so important because of compound interest compared to saving that same amount of money 10 years later. Those missing 10 years of compounding really has a huge effect. So option A is having to do with looking at an overview of your life, the money you're going to make, your expenses, the life events that tie into money, and what sorts of things you expect will cost a lot over the future years. Trying to think about how much money you need during retirement, what's a reasonable amount that you can expect for saving, like yields, interest rates, and so on. The other alternative is pumped storage, which is an engineering application having to do with electricity generation. So I'll talk about both of those one after another. Okay, the first one, I want to introduce the idea of mass balance to you. By training, I'm an environmental engineer. And so teaching this class having to do with engineering economy really doesn't have a lot to do with what I studied when I was getting my PhD. When I was getting my PhD, I thought a lot about water treatment, wastewater treatment, chemical reactions, biological reactions, and at the heart of all of that is the idea of mass balance and reactions inside of a reactor. So this diagram is sort of, it's a conceptual representation of your savings account. And so we're going to take a look at the cash flows in and out of your savings account. Income goes into your checking or savings account. You know, you'll get direct deposit most likely when you graduate and have a job. Money will come in and money will go out. So I'm asking you in this project to think of expenses in two different ways. The regular ongoing expenses, things like rent, cell phone bill, gas for your car, and so on. And then extraordinary expenses are the things that come up less often. And so purchasing a car would be considered an extraordinary expense if you were paying cash for a car rather than getting a loan. Another extraordinary expense might be getting married, which is really expensive for a lot of people, or having a kid, or sending your child to college. Your parents are probably feeling the pain, many of you, of that extraordinary expense. And so in this tank, which is sort of like, it's meant to represent a tank of water, what will cause the level of liquid in that tank to go up? What is it? More income than expenses, right. So if you open up your wallet and you're shelling out more money than is coming in, then the amount of money in your wallet's going to be decreasing. So that's the idea that accumulation is in minus out. And what you want in your life is you want the accumulation of wealth. You want to accumulate money. The opposite of accumulating money is accumulating debt. And that feels a lot worse than accumulating money. So what you have to do is you have to spend less than you're making. There's another key to it, though, and that is that what's inside the reactor is growing on its own. There's like a magical reaction, a chemical reaction, a biological reaction. In our case, when it comes to finances, that reaction, which is the growth of your savings, is just the interest or the yield that you're receiving on your investments. So if you buy a stock, you can get money two ways. Some stocks pay dividends, which are quarterly payments to their shareholders, and so you can make money that way, or you can hold on to the stock for a while and then sell the stock, and then you can receive what are called capital gains. And capital gains and dividends mean that your cumulative savings balance are going to grow. It's the same thing with a savings account or with a money market, bonds. All of them are purchased under the idea that the money that you set aside will be growing. Now think about if we didn't have money. What would be the alternative? Let's say that you have to plan for retirement in a society where there's no money. So it's going to be cold when you're retired, so you have to have enough firewood for your retirement. So maybe while you're young and strong, every night you'd go home and chop wood for a few hours and pile it up behind your house so that when you're infirm and can't swing the axe anymore, you have enough firewood. It'd be really inconvenient to have like all the physical stuff you're going to need for those years that you hope to be retired. The food, the electricity. I don't even think you could store electricity, right? Think of all the batteries you'd have to buy. So the idea of being able to barter for everything you need kind of illustrates one of the uses of money, and that is as a store of value. It's a way for you to set a little extra aside when you're young and are generating more value than you're consuming, and then when you're old, you can draw down on that value. In the end, you're going to consider a lot of factors. I have a handout here that describes the assignment in its entirety. The last component of the project is a table like this. There's a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and one of those habits is begin with the end in mind. And what that idea says is that when you start a project, you should think about what you're trying to do at the end of the project, because if you always keep that end goal in mind, then it will shape your activities as you're doing it. So I want to show you this, the end result of your project now, so that you can understand why you're having to do some of the components of it. Okay, so the first column that I have shown here in this illustration is the age. And so you'll need to think about when you're likely to graduate. Some of you may already have a job, and you may have income that's coming in already. And if that's the case, you can begin your project at the present. For those of you who don't yet have a job, what you're going to have to do is think about what year you're graduating, and then do some research to identify your likely income during that first year. Now, where could you find out about income, well, first of all, you have to know what kind of a job you're going after. You know, are you going to be a network engineer, a safety inspector at a nuclear power plant? Are you going to be a design engineer for the Division of Highways? You know, whatever the case may be. You can look online, you can talk to recent graduates, you can talk to faculty members who are maybe acquainted with what Marshall graduates are earning when they get jobs. You can look at job postings on monster.com, in the newspaper. There's a wide variety of information sources available, and as you do your research, you need to write down where you've been searching and what information you got, because part of this project is documenting your assumptions and explaining why you assumed inevitably some student thinks that they're going to make $120,000 a year when they first graduate, right? That's really unrealistic. But if you want to have that unrealistic assumption, then document it. You know, help me understand why that is and what your information is based on. So if you found something that makes you think that you're going to only make $20,000 a year your first year, I'd maybe think that sounds a little low. But you know, help me to understand what your assumptions are. It's not just the numbers that's enough. It's what's behind the numbers. So you'll note at the bottom of this spreadsheet, I've just got a really brief summary of some of the key ideas behind this data. In the full-blown report, I'd explain a lot more about where I got my information on the starting salary of $37,000. In the report, I'll explain what the job is, and an idea of maybe what part of the country, because salaries in some places are higher than others. You know, for instance, if you live and work in San Francisco, the salaries are a lot higher than they are here in Huntington. Of course, the cost of living is also a lot more expensive than it is in Huntington. All right, so you'll notice at the bottom of the screen here it says, a big promotion assumed in 2030, 3% cost of living adjustment assumed for years 2021 and beyond. So it starts at 37, then goes to 42. Maybe this is an engineer who, in the first couple of years of an engineering career, you have relatively good increases in salary because when you first graduate, you kind of can't do very much. But then after a year, 2 years of experience, you've passed the FE exam, you are able to do more work, maybe get licensed. So there's a pretty good climb in salary for those first couple of years. But then after 2021, it's just a cost of living incremental adjustment. So you'll notice that these first few years are kind of like nice round numbers, 37,000, 42. It's okay to have a couple of years that you manually are assuming a salary, but then after that, you should have the growth of the salary be dependent on these cost of living adjustments. Now, when you have a job, you don't get paid the same amount the whole career. And like if I saw a student who had 37,000 at age 23 and 37,000 at age 46, then I'd think that they didn't do the assignment very well, because you're not including the fact that when you get more experience, you're more valuable in the company and generally get paid more for that. That assumption would neglect the fact that inflation is causing prices to increase throughout the economy. And because prices are always going up, pay has to go up as well. In the last few years, pay hasn't matched inflation, especially at Marshall. Since I got here, I've got 2 1% raises, and meanwhile, a whole host of things costs have gone up a lot. But you have to assume something, and here in the report and at the bottom of the spreadsheet is just a really brief summary of where these numbers are starting at and what it's based on. Any questions so far about what I've said on the project or what you're seeing on the slide there? Okay, so part of it is income. You have to do research to find out for your career of choice what you're going to make. Expenses. You have to assume expenses. Why do you think expenses are going up? What is it? Inflation is part of it, right? Right. Kids are so expensive. You get more stuff. The more you own, the higher expenses are. If you buy a big house, then you're going to have to pay to heat a big house. You're going to have to pay to put furniture in a big house and decorate a big house. And so In this expenses summary, I ask you to consider how much your life is going to cost. And it's not enough to just Google what is the average cost of living in Columbus, Ohio. You know, like if you think you're going to live in Columbus, Ohio. That wouldn't be good enough because you're not the average person. You know, I want this project to reflect your preferences. If you know that you spend a lot of money on travel and never eat out, then make your analysis of your lifelong expenses reflect that. If you're never going to marry, if you're never going to have children, then you're going to be a lot richer than me, and your expenses should reflect that. Or if you're going to have a dozen kids, then, you know, this column should reflect an analysis of where your money's going to go. So you'll see here in the little explanatory blurb, see description of expenses and related inflation assumptions. Note, marriage in year 2025 and kids in year 2029 and 2033. So if we look at the numbers here, the expenses are going up a little bit incrementally because of an inflation assumption, but then boom, it jumps when you go from 29 to 30 because now you have more expenses related to maybe going from a studio apartment to a one-bedroom apartment. Or, you know, whatever it is, the expenses went up because you got married. And on top of that, you've got this extraordinary expenses, which is the cost of the wedding itself. Whoever this is spent $55,000 on their wedding. Money well spent, right? It was a delicious meal. All right. So I hope you're getting an idea of where this is headed. In these extraordinary expenses, the explanation here, there's a car purchase in year 2022, a wedding, the kids are in college, and so on. So these first 1, 2, 3, 4 columns, year, income, regular, and extraordinary expenses, all of this is based on your analysis of what your life is going to be like. This next column, amount saved, is just a numerical operation. You're subtracting. So what do you suppose the formula is for that column? I bet you can figure it out. Income minus expenses. It's like the amount you can save in any given year. And so the reason why this person is saving $17,000 in year 2018 is that's the difference between their income and expenses. Is there any year where you might spend more money than you make? You know, of course. It looks like the year of the wedding was a tough one for this person. They spent $31,000 more than they made that year. All right. How is that possible? Well, you can either put it on your credit card, you can get money from your parents, or it looks like this person actually had built up enough savings before the wedding that they paid for it out of their cumulative balance, like the main tank of money. Look how the cumulative balance went down. It went from $172,000 in year 2024 to $150,000 at the end of year 2025. It's because of that big one-time outflow. And so they didn't have to take a loan from the bank. They had enough money on hand to do it just sort of out of the available funds. The one other column that's here I'll mention about is the investment yield. That is going to be based on the balance of the previous year. So 17,000 is the balance at the end of year 1. See the 17,000? Well, 5.5% of 17,000 is 935. Up here it says the rate of return on investments. In the report, this person made a rationale for how they're going to make 5.5% on their savings. They allocated some of the money to a checking account, some of the money to a certain stock that pays a dividend, made some assumptions about what the capital gains rate is going to be, and came up with a weighted average for the rate of return. And so this column of investment yield is based on the cumulative balance from the previous year and how much interest, basically, you're making during the year in question. And so cumulative balance this 39,435 is the amount from the year before plus the amount that was saved and the investment yield, which is the interest from the previous year's balance. Remember that this is being recorded, and when you have questions about what's supposed to go into this spreadsheet or what the columns are, then you can refer back to this recording and understand how to calculate the cumulative savings balance. Any questions so far? Go ahead. Right. Great question. You can do it either way. So the question was, what to do about another income. If you assume that you're going to be pooling resources with your spouse, that you'll have one sort of pot that all the money goes into, then you can include their income and you can include their expenses. It's really your preference. Some people keep separate checking accounts the whole time, but I don't have any preferences on that. Good question. Are there other questions? You're going to have to do research to figure that out. Like 5.5% is more than I'm making on my stocks. I'm pretty cautious when it comes to my retirement investments. I have them in this thing called, maybe you've heard of TIAA CREF. And so I'm in the guaranteed amount, which is pretty low. I got to get more. Are there extras over here, like usual? Thank you. So, how much rate of return you get depends partly on your appetite for risk. Are you willing to have years when your balance actually goes down? Then maybe you can weight your investments more towards stocks, which have the greater capacity for high yields, but also a greater probability of disappointing years when you lose money. Back in 2008, when there was the financial crisis, a lot of people had their retirement accounts wiped out, down 60, 70% in some cases. It was brutal. Other questions? All right. So I've just handed out the assignment instruction. Please read the whole thing. I've gone to a lot of effort. I've given this project twice before. You're the third group that I've run this project with, and so I feel like I know where the stumbling blocks are. I know what confuses students in the past, and so I've tried to put all of the information you need into this assignment description. So it's a little bit irritating when I get questions that are very clearly from students who haven't yet read the assignment. I try not to let that irritation show, but sometimes I'm not the best actor. So please read this. It'll help you out. It'll save you time. If you read the assignment description, it'll save you time and you'll get a better grade. So of course it's in your best interest to read this and see what it says. The first thing I note is that this is an individual project. Now, you can talk to other people about your project, of course. If you find a really great website that shows salaries for different fields in different cities, you can share information resources. But every report should be based on your own life circumstances, your analysis of what your income and expenses are going to be, your own preferences for how conservative you want to be with saving, and so on. So individual effort is one thing I wanted to emphasize. You'll notice that this handout is broken up into into sections that match the table on the screen there. So income from work is section 1. Expenses are sections 2 and 3. Retirement expenses are section 4. And the reason why I break that out separately is that people's behavior is very different during retirement than it is during their normal working years. You may be spending more if you travel. You'll almost certainly be making less because you won't be working during retirement. And so there's not a separate column on the spreadsheet for retirement, but if we were to continue this spreadsheet with a few more rows, if we went down to age 65 or 70, what you'd notice is suddenly the income from work drops to 0. Now there's still investment yield, the savings account is continuing to grow, but the expenses may be a little bit different as well. So you'll just include the retirement stuff in the pre-existing regular and extraordinary expenses column. But I'm asking you to, in this report section, explain maybe which Winnebago you're going to buy and how costly that's going to be, or how much you plan to spend on airline tickets to Florida every year. Just whatever it is. Good question. So the income amount, what students have done in the past with this, the income that they're talking about would be their after-tax income. So that the money that you've got left over is what you can spend on expenses and save. And so since we're talking about taxes, one of your sources of income during retirement might be Social Security. And so it may not be that your income goes to zero at age 65 or age 70, but you can look up and see what Social Security is likely to pay out in the future. I mean, it's probably a safe assumption to assume that it's going to pay out zero because it'll be bankrupt by the time you retire. But since we talked about taxes, I thought I'd mention that as a possibility. These are great questions. I can tell the wheels are turning. Any other questions? Okay, so that's why we have that retirement column. Investment, we've already discussed. Cumulative saving balance. Section 7 is references. Just another suggestion. Whenever you're working on this project, get a piece of paper to write your notes down on it. There's nothing more annoying than having to search for a website you already saw, and you got the information from it, but you forgot to get the link, or you forgot to get the name of the website, and so you're having to find it again. So save yourself that heartache and just do it the first time. So here's also on the third page of the handout, a template that you can use when you're setting up your spreadsheet on Excel. I want to show you one thing about printing. Okay, so here's Excel. This is the thing that we're just seeing on the screen here. It's the example of the printout. So if I go to File, Print, what it's going to do is it's going to break it across 2 pages. Oh, that's awful. That would be so annoying to try and grade it. If I get a handout from you and it just it's broken across 2 pages, I don't know which year is which. And then these words are just cut off in the middle of what you were saying. It's worse than useless. I hate it. So there's an easy fix. All you have to do is just go to Scaling and say, fit the sheet on 1 page. And now it's problem solved. And so it'll all fit on the same page. It's a little bit smaller, but that's okay. Or if we wanted to really optimize things, we could say, well, now let's go with the landscape orientation. And so now it all fits and it's sideways. And so please pay attention to not breaking up a table across multiple pages. That's the worst. Let me extend this just a few more years. Well, no. I think you get the idea. I want to leave a little bit of time to talk about pump storage. Any last questions before we move on to option B of the project? Okay. It's hard to store electricity, but it's not impossible. One of the ways to do that is to pump water really high during the night. And the reason why you do it at night is because at night people aren't using very much electricity. Businesses are closed. It's cooler at night, so air conditioners aren't running as much. And so places where they're generating electricity, especially with nuclear power, you can't turn a nuclear power plant on and off. The reaction kind of has to go at pretty much the same rate constantly through the day. So if you've got all this leftover electricity at night, you can pump it up to a high reservoir. And here's a picture of a reservoir on top of an elevated surface. And it's up there because then during the day, when there's a bigger demand for electricity, they'll turn the water around. And they'll have the water go downhill, spin a turbine, and it can generate electricity. And so there are some efficiency issues. You do lose some power by doing that. But here's pictures of various pump storage installations across the United States. They have some of these in Virginia. It's pretty common out in the western U.S. where they've got big mountains. And It's often used in conjunction with nuclear power. So here's a conceptual representation. You've got an upper reservoir and a lower reservoir. And you've got this system that is a combination pump and turbine. At night, it's a pump, and it's lifting the water. During the day, it's a turbine, and the water flows down through it. It's spinning and generating electricity. So there's the reservoir, pipe, pump, also a power plant for during the day. And so there's a formula that explains what the velocity of water in the pipe is going to be. I have the handout for this project posted on MU Online. Let me just show it to you so that you know where to find it. If you're interested in this option, I've never given my class two options before for the project, although I have run this project in previous semesters. I've never given them the option, so I'll be curious to see who goes with which project. So if you go to 221, you'll notice in the documents that are here, the course content, there's option A, the handout I've already given you, and then option B, the document for pump storage. And so here's the description with all of the formulas you're going to need to solve it. Now, nobody here has taken hydraulic engineering before, and these formulas are based on hydraulic engineering. But don't let that discourage you. These formulas are not rocket science. It's hydraulic engineering. So it's not that hard, honestly. So here's the assignment description. Let me just step you through some other things that I've got on here. The parameters are that when you are generating power, the amount of power you can find with this formula, and it's a function of the flow rate going through the pipes. So if you've got a lot of water going through the pipe, then you can generate more electricity. Or if the reservoir is really high on the hill, this H has to do with how high on the hill the reservoir is. So this is the equation you use for how much power is being generated. And H is a function of how high on the hill it is, and also the energy losses through the pipe. And so this parameter is telling you about the energy losses in the pipe. The flip side of things is that during the night, you're going to be lifting the water, and so you need a formula that tells you how much power is consumed at night when you're lifting the water. And so these two equations tell you how much head is required, and based on the flow rate Q, you can find the power. And all these calculations are explained in the handout. You're going to be doing in terms of kilowatts. So I tell you about how much pipe costs for the project, and I give you some information about how expensive electricity is at night. We're going to assume that you're buying electricity for a penny per kilowatt hour at night, and then during the day you can sell electricity for 12 cents a kilowatt hour. So there's a spread there. You know, if you can pump the water up on the hill at night and then turn around and sell electricity for a lot more during the day, there's a profit incentive here. But you've got to pay for a lot of things. You have to buy the electricity, you have to buy the pipe, you have to pay to build the reservoir, you have to pay for this combination power plant / pump, and some information about it lasts for 50 years and you're going for a 7% rate of return. And so in the project, I ask you to find some things out. For all of these parameters, you're going to have to use Excel to find out if you're using a 1 meter diameter pipe, then what flow rate would make it so that you are just breaking even. Because you have to build a lot of stuff, and so if not enough electricity is being generated, you can't cover your fixed costs, as they're called. You know, the things that you have to pay for regardless of whether the system is in operation or not. The next part of the project is to find out for a certain flow rate, then playing around with the pipe diameters to find out which is the optimal pipe diameter for a certain flow rate. And then the last part of the project is just optimizing altogether, figuring out what pipe diameter and what flow rate is going to generate the most amount of money. And there is a single right answer for this project. Unlike the personal finance project, every student is going to have different information. But this one, there are some right answers out there. And in the PDF file that I've provided, I give you sort of like a getting started document, just simply because most of you aren't familiar with these hydraulic calculations. And so if you go through these questions in the order that I've provided them, you'll basically learn what you need to know to be able to set everything up in the spreadsheet. So this getting started document you do by hand, and I tell you the final answer for the 2 parts of this document. And you can come check your work with me or ask me questions. And then once you've done that, then you can solve these other questions, A, B, and C, which is this one. You can do that on the spreadsheet. So that's the harder of the 2 projects. Let's just finish up by looking at the announcements here. So Monday is when this next homework assignment that I've just given you is due. When we get together on Friday, we're going to start talking about a new section of the book where we're comparing projects. So I'll see you then, and let me know if you've got any questions about the project so you can decide which one to begin.